Hello and welcome to Audiobook Reviews. In this video, I'll be discussing The Blackest Heart, the second book in the Five Warrior Angels series by Brian Lee Durfee. Now, before I start this video, I do want to add as a disclaimer, a while back I reviewed The Forgetting Moon, the first book in this series. It was not the most positive review, and so I planned to read the second book eventually, but did not originally plan on doing it quite so quickly. But something crazy happened, and the author actually saw the video on YouTube and commented on it, and then asked me to reach out to him on Facebook and said he would send me an autographed copy of the second book, which he then did, and a couple of nifty bookmarks as well. So if someone's going to literally send me an autographed copy of a book, I will bump that up to my read list. Still kind of crazy that that actually happened, but honestly, I thought it was not only really cool, but considering, like I said, it was not a positive review, and you can look at the comments there too. He responded, kind of said he got where I was coming from, and said that he thinks a lot of my concerns and issues will be addressed in the later books. So I was hesitantly optimistic. With the first book, I did have a lot of issues, but I was interested to see, okay, can we get things better? Can we get on the right track? And quite honestly, the answer to that was yes. Now, I did outright tell the author as well that in no way am I going to just make a review positive. I don't like the book. And he was completely okay with that too. And that's why I wanted to add this disclaimer, because my review is actually going to be a lot better on The Blackest Heart, but that is completely based on its own merits. There are so many things. It's seriously, it's weird because some of my like verbatim questions are answered or other things addressed almost immediately in the book. So it was a little crazy to see to that degree. So he meant it when he said that those things were addressed. And really, starting out talking about the book too, since I mentioned the cover on the first one, which I was kind of on the fence of, I didn't think it was a bad cover. It just kind of made me think, for some reason, more sci-fi than fantasy. So I was kind of like, oh, I guess that's not quite what we're looking at here. But Blackest Heart has just kind of this sinister looking cover with what appears to be one of the Bloodwoods and a dagger. And so did like this better as well. But what I want to do is really talk about what some of my concerns were with the first book and whether or not they were addressed. And there were still things that I didn't care for in this book as well, and you're going to get that with anything. But since I did do a review and it was a pretty negative review on book one, I really want to address those things first. So, one big thing I mentioned, and since the Bloodwood's even on the cover of this one, is I did mention that the Bloodwoods are supposed to be these just crazy good assassins, and we're supposed to be, afraid of them. They're insane, but the first book kind of opened up with immediately some being killed, and so I felt like that was a little counterproductive. Book two opens up with us getting to see a really much deeper look into the Bloodwoods and their training and kind of all the sinister inner workings of Black Dougal's cast of assassins. So really was a great way to start that out. Now, something I spent a lot of time on in my review of the first book as well was Tala's plotline. Just saying, why on earth, for one, does this assassin just seem to know everything? And two, what's the deal with the game? Why would we be doing this? And literally, a direct quote is the assassin, who we find out at the end of the first book is Seda, literally says, "Do you want to know why I'm doing this?" And then answers the question. And I'm just like, okay, I have to give that credit because that was a big thing as well. More so than that, because you can just say, oh, maybe that was something that he thought after the first book, so I wanted to do it too. But throughout the story, through what you learn about the Bloodwoods and what you learn about the Valley, it does really contextualize that sort of game playing. It seems a bit immature, but it's more so that's just how both of those groups of people tend to work a little bit. They play games. Everything's a game. the whole world is a game to the Valley, and that's just kind of what they do. So with the added context, it did make it make a lot more sense. It actually does seem like that is a normal thing that this kind of person would do. Completely understand that that is the case at this point. So that was another large piece that I felt like was addressed pretty quickly. The next big thing is I talked about exposition dumps, and I talked about how just so many things seemed really familiar and kind of tropey with the first book. And the second book, things were a lot better. Now, to me, what it seemed like is the first book kind of needed to settle that up so that Durfee could tell the story he wanted to with book two. Since I was actually in contact, I actually did ask him a couple of questions concerning this, and he told me with the world building, he actually apparently on his own YouTube channel has some videos about this as well. But with the world building, what he said is that he kind of tried to study other really big series like Wheel of Time, Song of Ice and Fire, and look at, okay, how much world building did they do? He didn't want to have too much or too little. To me, it felt like too much in the first book, but in the second book, we did learn a lot more about the world, but it was less kind of thrown at you because I feel like whether or not it sounds like it might not necessarily have been intentional, but the first book had a bit too much, but that allowed the second book to not quite have that. Something he did specifically say too, which after reading book two, I really wondered, is that book one was intended to have a lot of tropes and cliches, and because the books after really turn that on its head. And book two already really has so much trope subversion, and even some of the things that seemed like they were going to be tropes in the first book, you find out were not exactly what you thought. Book two really, I felt like, branched deeper into something he put in the foreword of the first book, where if you do read the whole series, basically remember you can't always believe what you hear or what you read. And it kind of felt at parts that you almost had the unreliable narrator type person, where there's not really a narrator to the story, but you're only seeing certain sides of the story. And in The Blackest Heart, you get so much more coming in that's going on, and it really, really shows you that maybe, all of these things aren't true, or maybe I don't know which direction this is going to go. I talked about also with Forgetting Moon, we're kind of shown the different religions, and that's actually expanded on even a little bit more in book two as well. We have the different religious texts. We have our main group of characters in Golconda who followed the way and truth of legend. We had the kind of enemies coming from Sora Severe who follow the chivalric illuminations of Rigel, who's the son of Lyjan and Mia, and then you have the brethren of Mia who follow Mia specifically in the Moon Scrolls of Mia. And then we'd heard bits about there was also this Angel Stone Codex, but we get to see also excerpts from another text called the Book of the Betrayer, which is apparently what the Bloodwood Assassins follow. And so all of these different competing things, and we're really led to believe that maybe all of them have some truth, maybe none of them are correct about certain things as well, and maybe there are things we just haven't even been introduced to yet. And Blackest Heart definitely does flash some things that it sounds like are going to be really ramping up in the third book as well. So there was a lot going on, but so much of what started in trope territory really was subverted. And that I really, really enjoyed because that was an issue for me. I felt like too much of it was familiar in the first book. Apparently, that was intentional with it, which still, for me, book one was not that enjoyable to read. I commented it was pretty frustrating for me, but book two definitely made up for a lot of my problems. And those are the things I kind of wanted to bring up that really were fixed. As far as characters, I still feel like some of the characters come out a little bit flat. There were times where in each chapter is a character's point of view, and there were times where I'd go to a different character and I didn't realize it at first until I see their name and I'm like, oh, that's right, this is a different character now. And just some of them still kind of sound similar. So I definitely think that's still something to be worked on. But as far as kind of the overall feel of the book, I commented that Forgetting Moon just didn't seem like it knew what it wanted to be. Blackest Heart to me seems like absolutely Durfee knew where he wanted to be and executed it very, very well. I do otherwise, most of my other complaints were a little bit minor. There's a couple of idiosyncrasies I noticed. The word orbs used quite a lot. And you get a couple of things that are repeated a little bit. I've noticed as well, Durfee seems to have a way of being really blatantly obvious about something if he wants you to know about it, and then at the same time being extremely vague and mysterious about other things. So it's kind of like making sure you notice certain things while almost using that to hide other things from you as well. And it's once again, it's a really just interesting the way some of this is weaved in, and there most certainly was some of this that was done what seemed clumsy in book one. It was shown like there's actually a reason why that happened in that way. So very, very interesting overall. One thing I will note with the characters, though, is what I found was interesting is by the end of the first book, the characters I was the most annoyed with were Nail and Jondrelin. Tal's plotline I had issues with, but not the character itself. Those two characters you hear from a lot less in book two. And that I think right off the bat, I kept thinking like, I'm going to read these, and I kept reading other people, so it kind of got me into it quicker as well. So I thought that was interesting, and that could have just been the amount of story to tell. But those characters I felt like were focused on a little less, and we got to see from some other characters in the surrounding group as well. The last thing I will say about characters though is there's still I hate Liz Hen and Doki. I don't like them, and I really was hoping that they would like be killed off, and it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. But those two, it's even because Liz Hen was just terrible and obnoxious in the first book, and Doki was not so terrible, but also just obnoxious to me. And you get a little bit more kind of explanation into it, and it's that she's scared and she's lashing out. I'm like, I don't care. I just hate those characters, and I don't think anything is going to change that. In the spoiler section, I'll mention a little bit more about that, but that's something I did feel like I had to put out there. So the last thing I want to talk about before getting into spoilers was just kind of the way the plot changed a little bit. And we had everything kind of coming together. And once again, to me, book one just felt like really setting things up. There were a lot of things that happened, but it seems like it's getting much, much broader scale, much more important events as the story continues on. And so that setup, I felt like really made book two all the better because everything was having the moving parts. But there was a plot line where we have the group of characters who are searching for more of the weapons of the five warrior angels. We know where at least two of them are. Um, I suppose three of them are after book one. And so there's still two more weapons to be found. And that kind of quest and the different areas they go, there's a section where they're like going over glaciers and mountains and mines. I got a very much kind of Dungeons and Dragons vibe from it. And it reminded me a little bit of the Dragonlance novels. And it was done in a way where in the first book, I felt like some of it was just too cliche. Things were done a bit differently, and it wasn't all complete cliche here at all. It felt more kind of an homage to that, and that wasn't something I actually did ask the author about, so I don't know if he did read Dragonlance novels. Um, I'm sure he's probably read some; they're popular books, but I kind of got that feeling there. But that was something where the biggest thing that just kind of took me out of the book was the the escapades of Beer Mug the dog. And there is a lot of the dog in book two, and the dog was pretty important in book one. And it starts doing things that don't seem like they're particularly possible. And I was like, okay, I can kind of buy it. And then it continued, and that was one big thing. Also, two characters not getting frostbite and having completely ruined feet forever after some barefoot walking. up in the mountains and in glaciers. Those are the two big things. I'm like, I just can't quite look past that. It did kind of took away the realism for me, but otherwise, for the most part, a very enjoyable story, and I am really excited for what's to come. With that, I am going to jump into spoilers because I'm already getting a bit long on this video, and there are a few things that I very, very much want to talk about that are quite big spoilers for the book and are really, really important things as well. So if you do want to skip the spoiler section, go ahead and check the description. You'll see the timestamp of where you can skip to for the end summary. But from here on out, there will be spoilers, and they will be very, very large spoilers. So with that said, my absolute favorite moment in this book, we find out that Borden Bronichel is still alive. Now, that was one of those things, it kept getting mentioned, the true fate of Borden Bronichel, the true fate. So, assumed he was potentially alive and doing something else. It turned out he'd been captured by the king of Sorsavir and was imprisoned there. And Crystalwood, or Krista, is supposed to kill him, and he ends up apparently actually being incredibly skilled, and him and Ironcloud, who is pretending to be a completely different person, end up actually breaking out of the prisons and taking her with, and they end up capturing Hans Rake, the other Bloodwood that we see a lot happen with in the book as well. But they're leaving, and there's this moment where they're talking, and he's trying to convince her of his side, and he tells her basically his biggest regrets, what he sees as his biggest sin, and it's that he took two twins from their mother 17 years ago, before before the events of the book, and that he specifically asked Shawcroft and his brother to play along, that they had them and that they were decoys. And that moment right there, you end up finding out that both Nail and Crystalwood, who we're both thinking are these incredibly important, these are these twins who are both meant to be warrior angels, and they were actually just bait all along. And all of Nail's dreams of how, I always felt like I was important, and he's wanting to know about his parents, and it's just kind of like they're irrelevant. It's just they're two random children that were taken, that were hopefully resembling enough. So they were big, and that kind of flip, oh, it was such a great moment to read. And this is something I did ask the author about as well, which is the idea of starting out with kind of that tropey, the orphan child, and that is something that he did on purpose. And in the foreword, he mentioned that he himself was an orphan and he is adopted, and so he really resonated strongly with all of these different stories that had stories of the orphan trying to find their parents, and the fact that it turns out being that no, Nail's not special, and he's doesn't have this mysterious parents, and they're probably just nobodies. And Durfee said that for him, that was kind of as he grew up, and when he was a kid, he used to tell crazy stories about who his parents were and what was going on there, and just live in this fantasy world before realizing that hey, they were probably nobody, and maybe things don't really work out that way as they do in those fantasy stories. So very much subverting the trope, and it's kind of it's a dark moment. I imagine we'll have to see Nail actually deal with that later, but it also makes sense as why, even though Nail's kind of set up that way as that character, I don't know, something felt like it wasn't quite there, and that added so much more context to it as well, and was just a crazy moment to read. And it just tells you in general what more is to come, because you find out that so much about what you knew was not correct at all, and you were making the same assumptions that a lot of the characters were. And the people who know the truth, they or know what they think is the truth, even they don't necessarily know. And that's kind of something too, where throughout the second book especially, and there were flashes of it in the first book, you see different people potentially being set up to be the warrior angels, and it seems different groups think that it's very different people who actually are going to be the warrior angels. And you kind of have the moment too where Valdraken is talking to Nail about his marks. He's like, well, I have these marks. I must be this important person they're telling me to. And he's like, there's probably so many people who have those marks. And it harkened back to Doki in the first book having the same exact marks, essentially, through pure coincidence, how they both got them. And so kind of that note of, hey, even if these things seem very significant, doesn't mean they are. And it was, once again, a character having a very cynical viewpoint, but it resonated. And it shows, even though this is a fantasy story, it kind of brought a little bit more realism to it and showed you that, Durfee is not afraid to pull punches, and the grimdark writing style, obviously he's not afraid to pull punches, but it was, I think, a really great move narratively and just instantly kind of added more to these characters in general. There were other moments as well too, where like you find out a little bit more about Anna Spades. There's one sentence very early on that I felt developed her character more than what we got the entire first book. Explained why she did what she did, and we get to see more of kind of those character defining traits. Now, it would have been nice to have some of those in the Forgetting Moon. Don't get me wrong, but you definitely got a lot more of that and a lot more contextualizing things and just flipping things upside down and telling you now you don't even know what's going to happen. So very, very interesting there. The other big thing in the last spoiler section is the final battle was just freaking cool. They're fighting on like this strait that goes through it. The tide gets low enough that there's sand there and you can walk across between these two countries essentially, and they're fighting, and then the tide starts to rise and all the sharks come and the sea serpents, and it was just a wild scene. Really, really fun to read. It was pretty cool. That was the scene, though. Of course, I was really hoping Liz Hen would die, and then she's going to get hung afterwards. I knew it was going to happen because the little epigraphs told you that basically Godwin was going to end up sacrificing himself for somebody. But I'm like, please don't let it be Liz Hen. Just let those characters go. So I'm still, I don't like them. Like I said earlier, still don't. But that's neither here nor there. Really, overall, Blackest Heart was a thoroughly enjoyable read, and one of the most surprising books for me because of the fact that I had a pretty darn negative view of book one, and a lot needed to happen to fix that. And I think The Blackest Heart really did a great job of that. I did still have some issues with the characters, some things that happened that just were a bit too cheesy or a bit unbelievable in the book, but overall, what was revealed, what was shown, what was flipped on its head, so much of the damage of book one, which once again apparently was at least somewhat intentional with having there be a lot of cliches and tropes to subvert more later. Still, there's a lot I would have changed about that first book because if it would have been a little bit more like Blackest Heart, I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more. But I really, really did enjoy this book, and I'm actually incredibly excited for the third book, which it sounds like unfortunately has been delayed. Won't be out until maybe sometime like next year-ish. But I will be looking out. I'm definitely excited to see where this story goes next, which is not what I expected to be saying after finishing this book. So I'm really happy that Durfee proved me wrong with how things looked like they were going with the first book and really jumped into and made such a satisfying book two. Really excited to see what book three will hold. That said, I'm going to end as I'm getting quite long again. At least this time it's for mostly good reasons versus bad. But that was my review of The Blackest Heart. And if you did like this video, feel free to give it a like. And if you want to see more of my content like this, feel free to subscribe.